I'm Serafina, and I thought I knew what humiliation felt like, until my husband called me ugly in front of his friends and slapped me in the middle of a crowded restaurant. I wish I could say that was the worst of it, that it ended there. But it didn't, because behind that slap was something bigger, a marriage built on lies, manipulation, and control. A man who didn't just belittle me in public, but stripped away my independence in private. A family that stood by him, covering for his deception. And when I finally tried to leave, I realized it wasn't just my heart at stake. Money, power, secrets, they had all been weaponized against me. The soft hum of conversation filled the restaurant, blending with the clinking of crystal glasses and the subtle notes of a grand piano playing in the background. The kind of place where the lighting was dim, the air was thick with the scent of truffle oil and aged wine, and the waiters moved with the precision of trained performers. It was the type of restaurant where appearances mattered. I had spent hours preparing for this night, choosing the perfect navy dress, styling my hair just right, even applying makeup with a careful hand, something I rarely bothered with anymore. Tonight was important. Alistair had finally invited me to meet his colleagues, something he had always avoided in the past. So why did he barely look at me when I arrived? He didn't stand up, didn't greet me with a smile or even a nod. Just a glance, the briefest flicker of his eyes, before he muttered, "Oh, you wore that?" A quiet laugh from the table. Not mine. One of his friends. My heart twisted, but I swallowed down the sting and forced a smile as I slid into my seat. Traffic was a nightmare, I said, trying to smooth over the moment. He ignored me, already deep in conversation about work. Some project, some deal. I didn't know. I wasn't included. I sat there smiling tightly as his colleagues, 3 polished men in tailored suits, laughed at his jokes and nodded along to his stories. Whenever I tried to join in, I was met with dismissive glances or interrupted before I could finish a sentence. Alistair barely acknowledged me. The only time he spoke directly to me was to correct me or laugh at something I said. "That's not how business works, sweetheart," he said at one point, his voice coated in condescension. I shifted in my seat, my appetite fading. Then came the comments, subtle at first. "You sure you want to eat that much pasta? That dress really highlights your curves." A smirk, a chuckle from his friend. My face burned. I gritted my teeth, forcing down the lump in my throat. This wasn't new. It wasn't the first time he made me feel small. But something about tonight was different. It was meaner, more deliberate, like he wanted an audience. Then he said it. "God, you're so ugly when you get upset." The words hit like a slap before his hand even did. Silence stretched over the table. His friends stared at me, then at him, then back at their drinks, as if pretending nothing had happened. I froze. The air was knocked from my lungs. A slow, creeping nausea crawled up my throat. The room blurred, sounds muffled. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Then I did the one thing I told myself I would never do again. I looked at him, hoping for some kind of remorse. Alistair just smirked. I should have left, should have stood up and walked out. But instead, I whispered, "Why are you doing this?" His expression shifted, irritation flashing across his face, as if I was the one embarrassing him. And then, his palm struck my cheek. It wasn't a hard slap, not enough to knock me back, but enough to send a sharp sting rippling across my skin. Enough to make my eyes water. Enough to make me hate myself for staying seated. The restaurant went silent. And no one moved. No one gasped. No one rushed to my defense. The waiter hesitated, then gently placed the check on the table. Alistair leaned back in his chair, as if nothing had happened. "She's being dramatic," he told his friends, laughing lightly. I touched my cheek. It burned. I looked around, searching for something, anything, that would tell me I wasn't crazy, that someone had seen what just happened. But all I found were averted gazes, the uncomfortable shuffle of cutlery, the quiet clinking of glasses being raised to lips that would say nothing. No one cared. The world around me didn't just witness my humiliation. They silently agreed with it. And that's when I knew. This wasn't the first time he had tried to break me. It was just the first time I saw it for what it really was. I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring past the windshield, my grip on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. The slap still burned on my cheek, but it was nothing compared to the fire raging in my chest. When I stepped inside our house, the silence felt suffocating. Alistair was nowhere to be found. Of course he wasn't. He was probably out with his friends, laughing, drinking, celebrating his latest triumph, humiliating his wife. I kicked off my heels, barely noticing the way they clattered against the floor. My reflection caught my eye in the hallway mirror. I looked, unrecognizable. Smudged mascara streaked my cheeks, my lipstick was smeared, my expression hollow. I lifted my fingers to my cheek, tracing the red mark his hand had left behind. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Look at yourself, Sarah. Look what you've become." I grabbed a bottle of wine from the kitchen, my hands shaking as I poured a glass. The first sip burned down my throat, but I didn't stop. I needed something to dull the edge, something to quiet the voice screaming in my head. Maybe for the first time in my marriage, I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. It wasn't just tonight. It had never been just one night. I had let this happen, piece by piece, over the years. I thought back to the beginning, how Alistair had convinced me, so easily, to hand over control of our finances. "It's just easier this way," he had said, his voice smooth, reassuring. "You hate dealing with numbers, don't you? Let me handle it, baby. I'm better at this." I had nodded, relieved that I wouldn't have to stress over bills and budgets. He had taken my credit card, telling me he'd hold on to it for emergencies. He had suggested we consolidate our accounts, for simplicity, and I had let him. Months later, when I'd tried to log into our bank account, I found that the password had been changed. "Oh, I updated it," he had said offhandedly, sipping his coffee. "I'll send it to you later." He never did. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. We were a team, right? Marriage was about trust. But over time, I noticed the way he dismissed me whenever I asked about money. "Sarah, do you not trust me?" His tone always held a hint of accusation, just enough to make me feel guilty. So I stopped asking. I didn't notice how far he had pushed me out of my own life until it was too late. Then came the comments. They had started small, almost playful. "That dress isn't the most flattering on you." Then they became sharper. "You looked better when we first met." And eventually, they turned cruel. "You should be grateful I married you." I used to believe he didn't mean it, that maybe I was being too sensitive, maybe I was reading into things that weren't there. But now, standing in my kitchen, feeling the sting of his palm still fresh on my skin, I knew the truth. This was never an accident. Alistair had spent years chipping away at me, little by little, molding me into something smaller, something weaker, something that wouldn't fight back. And I had let him. I had let him steal my independence. I had let him tear apart my confidence. But tonight? Tonight, he made a mistake. Because he thought I would stay silent. He thought I would wake up tomorrow and pretend like nothing had happened. But for the first time in years, I felt something other than fear. I felt anger. Real, burning, unshakable anger. I set the empty wine glass on the counter and exhaled. My hands no longer trembled. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him win. And fury, I realized, was a far more dangerous thing than grief. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the past few hours press down on me. My cheek still burned from Alistair's slap, but it was nothing compared to the fire raging inside me. Sleep wasn't an option, not after tonight. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I turned it over, expecting a message from him, some half-hearted excuse, maybe even a warning. But no, it was a notification from our joint bank account, a transaction, another withdrawal. Alistair was still out, somewhere in the city, drinking, celebrating his cruelty. He wasn't thinking about me. He never did. I reached for my laptop, my fingers moving faster than my mind. I opened our banking records, scrolling through the recent activity, searching for something, anything, to explain where all this money had been going. Then I saw it. Transfers, large ones, thousands of dollars moved in increments, funneled into an account under a name I didn't recognize. Emma Caldwell. The name sent a cold chill through me. I knew it. I had heard it before, one of Alistair's employees. He had mentioned her in passing, just once, laughing at a joke she made at work. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, my stomach twisted. I clicked through more records, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The pattern was unmistakable. The money wasn't just disappearing, it was being cleaned. Shifted from business accounts, disguised as expenses, before landing in Emma's hands. It wasn't just an affair, it was fraud. I sat back in my chair, my breathing uneven. He wasn't just betraying me, he was risking everything. And for what? A girl barely out of college? A thrill? My hands clenched into fists. I wasn't going to let this slide. I found her number in Alistair's phone records. He had called her just yesterday. At first, Emma didn't answer. But I wasn't the type to let things go anymore. I called again. And again. The fourth time, she picked up. "Who the hell is this?" she snapped, her voice groggy, irritated. "Let's not play games, Emma," I said, my voice sharper than I had ever heard it. "I know who you are. More importantly, I know what you've been doing with my husband." Silence. Then a breathy laugh. "Oh, please. You're the wife, right? The one he—" She cut herself off, but I heard it. The way her tone dripped with amusement. She thought this was funny. "You think this is about the affair?" I interrupted. "You really think that's the problem here?" Another pause. I let it stretch, let her squirm. Then I went for the kill. "I know about the money." The smugness in her voice evaporated. "What?" "The transfers, Emma. The ones from Alistair's business accounts. The ones that end up in yours." A sharp inhale on the other end of the line. Don't bother lying." My voice was steady, cold. "I have the records. I have the proof. And if you don't start talking, I'll make sure your name is the first one handed over when this all comes crashing down." I could hear the shift in her breathing, the panic creeping in. He told me it was fine," she blurted. "That it was just a temporary fix. That he had it handled." I let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah? And what exactly did he promise you, Emma? That he'd take care of you? That he'd leave me for you?" More silence. "He told me you two weren't really together," she finally whispered. "That you were just—" "A burden," I finished for her. The words didn't hurt. Not anymore. I had spent years carrying his weight, bending myself into whatever shape he needed. A wife, a trophy, a woman who didn't ask questions. But now, I was something else entirely. Emma exhaled shakily. "What are you going to do?" I smiled. "Oh, sweetheart," I murmured. "I'm going to burn his world to the ground." By the time I hung up, my mind was already racing ahead. I backed up everything, screenshots of bank transfers, messages, call logs. I saved them to a drive, then emailed copies to myself just in case. Alistair thought he had me trapped, thought I was too weak, too blind to see what he was doing. He was wrong. I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to make sure he had nowhere left to run. And the first step? Letting him know I wasn't afraid anymore. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting pale golden lines across my bedroom floor. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept replaying my conversation with Emma, the way her voice had cracked when she realized the game was over. But it wasn't just her. Alistair didn't just betray me. He had built his entire life on a foundation of deception, and now, brick by brick, I was going to tear it down. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee when my phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated. It could be a lawyer, a bank representative, someone responding to the storm I had begun to stir. But the second I picked up, I knew I was wrong. A low, distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "You need to stop." I froze, my grip tightening on the phone. If you know what's good for you, the voice continued, you'll drop this. Walk away while you still can. A slow chill crawled down my spine. I forced my voice to stay steady. Who the hell is this? A pause. Then a quiet chuckle. Just a friendly warning, Mrs. Caldwell. The line clicked dead. I stood there for a long moment, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My coffee sat untouched, growing cold. Someone was watching. Someone was listening. And someone wanted me to be scared. Alistair came home around noon, looking as smug as ever. I didn't waste time. I got a call this morning, someone telling me to drop it. He barely glanced at me as he loosened his tie. And? I repeated, my voice rising. You don't even pretend to care? He let out a dry laugh. Jesus, Sierra, you sound paranoid. Maybe it was a scam call. Maybe you're just looking for a reason to play the victim. I clenched my fists. He was testing me, waiting for me to crack, to spiral into self-doubt the way I always had before. Not this time. You know what I think? I said, stepping closer. I think you're scared, and you should be. His smirk faltered for just a second. But then, a knock at the door, and just like that, the mask slipped back into place. Let me guess, I muttered. Your parents? Evangeline and Edmund Caldwell swept into the house like they owned it. Sarah, dear, Evangeline cooed, her red painted lips stretching into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We heard about everything, and we thought it was best to come speak with you directly. She settled into the chair across from me, legs crossed, perfectly poised. Edmund stood behind her, silent as ever, his mere presence carrying the weight of quiet intimidation. Alistair sat beside them, arms folded. I knew exactly what this was. Damage control. Evangeline let out a soft sigh, tilting her head. Alistair told us you've been a bit emotional lately. I nearly laughed. Emotional? Edmund finally spoke, his voice deep, measured. Sarah, we understand you're upset. Marriages go through difficulties. But what you're doing, digging through finances, making accusations, it isn't healthy. I stared at them, trying to wrap my mind around the sheer audacity. Alistair laundered money, lied, cheated. And I was the one in the wrong? You expect me to stay quiet? I asked, my voice dangerously even. Evangeline reached forward, placing a delicate hand on mine. Sweetheart, we're simply saying, if you let this go, we can make things easier for you. There it was. The bribe. Alistair's eyes flicked toward me, watching, waiting. I pulled my hand away. And if I don't? Evangeline's expression didn't change, but something in her gaze sharpened. Then you'll be making things much harder for yourself. I exhaled slowly. Get out of my house. Her smile flickered, but she stood, smoothing down the front of her designer coat. Think about it, dear, she said sweetly. We wouldn't want this to get uglier than it needs to be. That night, I found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single bullet. I stared at it, my pulse roaring in my ears. This wasn't just about reputation anymore. Someone was willing to escalate. I placed the bullet on the table, sat down, and took a deep breath. Then I grabbed my phone. Camille answered on the second ring. Sarah? What's wrong? I swallowed hard. I need your help, and I need it now. The next morning, I sent a message to Evangeline and Edmund. Simple, director. I don't scare easily. If they thought I was going to back down, they had no idea who they were dealing with. And the next step? Striking first before they could tighten their grip. I sat across from Camille in her office, my hands clasped together as she shuffled through a thick folder of documents. The weight of the moment pressed down on my chest, but beneath it, there was something else. Something sharper. Determination. This is it, Camille said, sliding the paperwork toward me. Once you sign, it's official. Divorce. But it wasn't just that. This wasn't about walking away. It was about burning it all down. I don't just want out, I murmured, gripping the pen. I want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. Camille nodded, her expression unreadable. Then we do this right. But Sarah. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. You know he won't take this lying down, right? I met her gaze and exhaled. I'm counting on it. I signed my name. Alistair walked into work that morning, expecting business as usual. He got something else entirely. He barely had time to set down his briefcase before his assistant hurried over, looking pale. Sir, you need to go to accounting. A pit formed in his stomach. When he entered the office, a team of corporate auditors was already there, papers spread across the conference table. What the hell is this? He demanded. His boss, a man who had once admired him, only glanced up coldly. Routine internal review, he said. Some flagged transactions came up. We just have some questions. Alistair schooled his features, forcing a smirk. You don't actually think We'll see, his boss cut in. He could feel it, the shift in the air, the weight of the scrutiny pressing against his carefully curated image. Someone had tipped them off. His mind immediately went to one person. Sarah. I was stirring my coffee when I saw him. I hadn't expected to run into Alistair that morning, but it was almost poetic. Him, fresh out of his crumbling kingdom, stepping into the same cafe as me. His gaze locked onto mine the second he saw me. And then, just like I predicted, he snapped, What the hell do you think you're doing? His voice was loud enough to draw attention. People turned, glancing between us. I calmly took a sip. Getting coffee? His jaw clenched. You went to my company. Did I? I tilted my head. Or did your own actions finally catch up to you? His hands balled into fists at his sides. You're trying to ruin me. I set my cup down and looked him straight in the eye. No, Alistair, you ruined yourself. The silence in the cafe stretched, thick and suffocating. He wasn't used to this, to being challenged, to not being able to control the narrative. For the first time, he looked uncertain. But I knew better. He wasn't backing down. He was planning his next move. And so was I. I woke up to the sharp chime of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. The screen was flooded with notifications, texts, emails, missed calls. At first, I thought it was Camille with an update, but as I scrolled, my stomach dropped. Liar, gold digger, crazy beach. Post after post, message after message. Alistair had gone public. He wasn't just fighting back. He was trying to bury me alive. I opened one of the emails from an old mutual friend, Marissa. Sarah, I don't know what's happening, but Alistair is telling everyone you're mentally unstable. He's saying you made up the fraud claims, that you've been cheating on him for years. He even said you drained his accounts and tried to frame him. I stared at the words, my fingers trembling against the phone. A sharp, bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. Of course! He knew he was losing control, so he did what men like him always did, painted himself as the victim. He was the loving husband. I was the manipulative, unstable wife. It was predictable and pathetic, but I wasn't going to let him win. I had barely finished my first cup of coffee when the second blow came. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I considered ignoring it, but something in my gut told me to pick up. I pressed the phone to my ear. Hello? A pause, then a voice, low and unrecognizable. This isn't just about your marriage anymore, the caller said. Walk away. A chill crawled up my spine. Who is this? Silence. Then a quiet exhale. You don't want to know. The line went dead. I sat frozen for a moment, my heart pounding against my ribs. This was different from the first call. The first was intimidation. This was a warning. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Camille's office. This is escalating, Camille said, pacing behind her desk, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. No kidding, I muttered, tossing my phone onto her desk. First, he slanders me. Now I'm getting anonymous threats. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Sarah, we both knew Alistair would retaliate, But this means he's desperate. I frowned. Desperate enough to do what? She hesitated. To pull strings. You don't know how many people he has in his pocket. If he's reaching beyond just his smear campaign, it means he's trying to shut you down before you can destroy him. The weight of her words settled in my chest. I wasn't just fighting Alistair anymore. I was fighting whoever he had been protecting all these years. But if he thought that would scare me, he was wrong. The cracks in his perfect facade were starting to show. By late afternoon, Celeste, Alistair's younger sister, called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Sarah. Her voice was softer than I remembered. I waited. She took a breath. I don't know what to believe. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Celeste? I just mean... She hesitated. He's my brother, but I know he lies. I know he manipulates people. This is a lot. Mom and Dad keep telling me you're doing this for money, but I don't know. For the first time, there was doubt in her voice. You know the truth, I said gently. You've always known. You just didn't want to see it. A beat of silence. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I sighed. You don't have to do anything, Celeste, but don't be part of the lie. I could hear her breathing on the other end, shaky and uncertain. He won't stop, Sarah. You know that, right? I smiled bitterly. Neither will I. That night, my doorbell rang. I expected Camille, maybe even Celeste, but when I opened the door, it was someone I never thought I'd see. Dorian, Alistair's co-worker. He looked uneasy, glancing over his shoulder before stepping inside. I can't stay long, he said quickly, but you need to know, Alistair is losing his grip at work. The financial review? It's worse than he thought. People are talking. I straightened. How bad? Dorian exhaled. Bad enough that some of us don't want to go down with him. He met my gaze. I have access to his records, Sarah. Emails, expense reports. The real ones, not the doctored versions. Hope sparked in my chest. If you're willing to fight, he said, I can help. I smiled for the first time all day. I'm more than willing. The moment Dorian left, I opened my laptop and got to work. I wasn't going to waste my breath defending myself to the world. I didn't need to, because I had something Alistair never would. The truth, and I was about to use it. The message came late at night. Emma Caldwell. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether this was another trap. But deep down, I knew better. Alistair had never been the type to show loyalty, only to demand it. And women like Emma, they were disposable to him. I called her. The second she picked up, I could hear the rage in her voice. He used me. I let out a dry laugh. You're just figuring that out? No. She exhaled shakily. I knew. I thought he'd at least keep his promises. She had been played, lied to, left hanging the second she was no longer useful. I didn't pity her, but I understood. I had been that woman once. What do you have? I asked. A beat of silence. Then, a quiet, almost bitter chuckle. Everything. Emma didn't just have receipts. She had proof. Bank statements, transaction logs, internal emails from Alistair, instructing her on how to disguise fraudulent transfers as business expenses. She had been his personal laundromat, funneling stolen money through her accounts while he promised her security, a future. Now she was out for blood. I forwarded everything to Camille. Her response came within minutes. Camille. This is it. He's done. I smiled for the first time in days. It started small. A whistleblower post on an anonymous forum. A leaked screenshot here, an email there. At first, people weren't sure if it was real, but then more surfaced, and more. Soon, Alistair's name was everywhere. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, hidden accounts. His carefully built empire wasn't just shaking, it was collapsing. And I was only getting started. The phone call came just after noon. Camille's voice was buzzing with energy. The company's launching an internal investigation. I closed my eyes, letting the satisfaction settle in my bones. Alistair had spent years building his reputation, weaving lies so seamlessly that no one had ever questioned them. Until now. Are they taking it seriously? I asked. They have no choice, she said. Too much has surfaced. They can't ignore it anymore. I glanced at my laptop, at the flood of messages, the articles popping up on news sites. People were talking. Employees were coming forward. The pressure was mounting. Good, I murmured. Not just good, Sarah. Perfect. He's spiraling. I could only imagine it. The man who had once controlled everything, watching it all slip through his fingers. I should have expected his retaliation. By that evening, he was everywhere. Social media posts, desperate interviews, claims that I had been the abuser, that I was behind the fraud. He called in favors, pulled strings, tried to paint himself as the real victim. But the cracks in his story were obvious. Too many people had started talking, his former employees, old friends. Even his own sister, Celeste, publicly distanced herself. For the first time, Alistair was losing control. And I was winning. Then came the final blow. I sat in front of the camera, my hands steady, my voice calm. I told my story. I detailed the years of control, of manipulation, the gaslighting, the financial abuse, the threats, the slap at the restaurant that started it all. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for sympathy. I just spoke the truth. By the time I finished, the world knew exactly who Alistair Caldwell really was. His kingdom was burning, and I was the one who struck the match. But the fire wasn't out just yet. Alistair walked into his office that morning, his posture stiff, his jaw clenched. He had spent the night calling in favors, trying to find an escape route, a way to spin this disaster into something salvageable. But as soon as he stepped off the elevator, he knew. Something was wrong. The office was too quiet. Employees avoided his gaze, whispering behind their hands. His assistant wasn't at her desk. Instead, 2 security guards stood by the entrance to the conference room, waiting for him. Dorian was inside, along with the entire executive board. His boss, a man who had once shaken his hand with respect, now looked at him with something else. Disgust. Alistair, his boss began. Sit. Alistair didn't move. This is a mistake. Dorian slid a folder across the table. No, Alistair, you made a mistake. Inside were pages of transaction records, signatures, email correspondence, every single one tied back to him. The room was silent. Then his boss sighed. Your position is terminated, effective immediately. Legal action is already in motion. Alistair's world tilted. You can't do this. One of the executives leaned back in his chair. You did this to yourself. The security guard stepped forward. Alistair barely processed it when they gripped his arms and escorted him out. Through the halls, past his employees. People who had once feared him, admired him. Now they only watched. And some of them smiled. By the time he reached the sidewalk, reporters were already there. Microphones, cameras, flashing lights. Someone shouted, Alistair! Do you have a statement? He turned away, head down. His accounts were frozen, his reputation destroyed. And the legal battle? It was just beginning. Alistair drove straight home. He needed his family, his father's connections, his mother's ruthless strategy. But when he opened the door, they were already waiting. Evangeline sat in the grand living room, legs crossed, sipping tea as if this were nothing more than another scandal to sweep under the rug. Edmund stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Celeste sat off to the side, arms folded, eyes downcast. Alistair took a shaky breath. You heard. His mother finally looked up. Of course we heard. Then you know I need... You need? Evangeline's voice was sharp. You need? She set her cup down with a quiet clink. Do you have any idea what you've done? Alistair's patience snapped. I am your son. Edmund turned then, his face carved from stone. Not anymore. The words hit him harder than any scandal ever could. I built everything I have for this family, Alistair growled. Evangeline tilted her head. And now you've ruined it. He turned to Celeste, desperate. You believe them? For a moment, her lips parted. But then she just shook her head. I don't have to believe them, Alistair. I just know. Alistair's fists clenched. You're abandoning me? Evangeline exhaled, as if bored. We're cleaning up your mess. She stood, smoothing the fabric of her dress. And you, dear, are no longer our concern. Alistair could only watch as his family turned their backs on him. He was alone. Completely, utterly alone. I met him one last time. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see him, see what was left. He looked smaller than before, slumped in a chair at a quiet cafe. No expensive suits, no polished arrogance, just a man who had finally been brought to his knees. I sat across from him, folding my hands on the table. This is the part where you blame me. He didn't respond. I let out a soft laugh. Or maybe this is the part where you beg. Still nothing. I studied him, taking in the hollow look in his eyes, the slight tremble in his hands. You know what's funny? I said, leaning closer. I don't even hate you anymore. His gaze flicked to mine, and for the first time, there was nothing behind it. No calculation, no fury, just emptiness. I stood, slipping my purse over my shoulder. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Alistair. And with that, I walked away. For the first time, revenge tasted bittersweet. But I knew one thing. I was finally free. And now, I had to learn how to live again. I woke up to soft morning light spilling through the sheer curtains of my new apartment. The space was still unfamiliar, the walls too bare, the furniture too neatly arranged. But it was mine. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up to the sound of someone else's footsteps, the weight of someone else's expectations pressing against my chest. I rolled out of bed, stretched, and padded to the kitchen. The silence felt strange, almost deafening. There was no tension in the air, no sharp voice waiting to cut me down before the day even started. Just me. I brewed my own coffee, took the first sip, and let the warmth settle in my chest. I had spent years waking up in a house that never felt like home. Now, standing here, in my own space, drinking my own coffee, I finally felt free. I met Camille at a cafe downtown. It had become our unofficial headquarters, the place where she broke the worst news and where I pieced myself back together. She slid a file across the table, tapping the cover. It's official. The divorce is finalized. The company's pressing charges, and Alistair, well, he's done. I exhaled, staring at the folder. It was everything I had fought for, but now that it was here, it felt anticlimactic. Camille studied me. You don't look thrilled. I swirled my coffee absently. I thought I'd feel something more. Satisfaction, maybe. Relief. And? I shrugged. I just feel done. Camille nodded, as if she understood. That's because this was never about revenge, Sarah. You weren't trying to win. You were trying to survive. I smiled softly. I guess I did. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Celeste. I hesitated before answering. Hello? A quiet sigh on the other end. Then, can we talk? I agreed to meet her at a quiet park near my apartment. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench, fingers nervously twisting in her lap. When she looked up, she seemed different. Lighter, maybe. Less like the woman who had stood in the shadows of her family. More like someone finally stepping into the light. I owe you an apology, she said without hesitation. I shook my head. You don't? I do, she insisted. I knew what he was, Sarah. I always did. But I was too afraid to say anything, to do anything. I let my parents control me the same way he controlled you. I swallowed hard. I wasn't sure what I had expected from this conversation, but honesty wasn't it. She took a deep breath. When you stood up to him, it changed things for me. You made me realize I don't have to be part of that family's lies anymore. Something inside me softened. I had spent so long thinking I was alone in my pain. But maybe I wasn't the only one who had been trapped. I reached over, squeezing her hand. Then don't be. She gave me a small, grateful smile. I won't. That evening, another message came in. Dorian. Dorian. I heard you were looking for a fresh start. If you're interested, there's a position at my firm. No pressure, just think about it. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. A fresh start. Not just escaping something toxic, but building something new. I typed back 2 words. Me. I'm in. Then I stepped out onto my balcony, breathing in the city air. For years, I had spent every waking moment just trying to survive. But now, for the first time, I was finally living. Life has a way of teaching us lessons in the most brutal, unforgiving ways. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that survival isn't enough. You deserve to live. Truly live. For years, I thought endurance was strength. I believed that if I just held on long enough, things would change. That love meant sacrificing parts of myself until there was nothing left. But I was wrong. Strength isn't staying in a place where you are belittled, controlled, or manipulated. Strength is walking away, even when you're terrified of what comes next. Maybe you've been in a situation like mine. Maybe you felt stuck, unheard, afraid to take that first step because you don't know if you'll land on solid ground. Let me tell you this, you will. The fear of the unknown is nothing compared to the slow suffocation of staying where you're not valued. And if you're watching this, wondering if it's too late for you, it's not. It never is. You can start over. You can reclaim your life. You can build something new, something better, something that is yours. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from something toxic? What gave you the courage to finally say, enough? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story resonated with you, or tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories reach. And if this video wasn't for you, I'd love to hear why. Your voice matters. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next story. Because life isn't just about endings, it's about the powerful new beginnings waiting on the other side.